Hello and welcome back to Getting to the Top, where I interview transformational leaders about their leadership journey in hopes that I can certainly entertain and inspire you on your leadership journey and encourage more diverse candidates to go to the ultimate goal of leadership within organizations. Today, I have the absolute delight of interviewing Lara Quentrall-Thomas, and I'm going to warn you that she's hilarious. But she's also well known for her business networking skills and commitment to philanthropy. She's a leading HR and recruitment services practitioner in Trinidad and Tobago with more than 30 years experience. Her role as a founder and chairman of Regency Recruitment and Resources includes strategic planning, crafting HR service proposals and contracts, negotiating client master service agreements, and curating and facilitating training programs for corporate customers in a range of topics, including performance management, business etiquette, interviewing skills, and professional networking. And we will benefit from that experience today. She also spearheads Regency's ESG and CSR initiatives, which I think is incredibly necessary and such a good area for her to specialize in. She includes partnerships with COSTAT to provide employment support and training for formerly incarcerated citizens. She's the former director of the National Training Agency, Office of Procurement Regulation, Economic Advisory Board. She's the founding president of both the TNT Organization of Recruitment Service Providers and the Association of Female Executives of Trinidad and Tobago. She's also a dedicated Rotarian since 1999, and she's a major donor to the Rotary Foundation and past district governor for Rotary in the Southern Caribbean. She is a training facilitator for incoming club leaders across the region and has managed the annual Model UN Youth Development Program for more than 8 years. Welcome, Lara. And I didn't even cover everything, huh? With all sorts of other issues, which I think are really pertinent to the conversation we're having.
Well, thank you, Racquel, for inviting me. And I'm not sure how funny I can be at 8 o'clock in the morning, but I shall do my best. But yeah, it's been 30 years, a really, really interesting journey. And I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to, share some stories with you and hopefully some advice and information that's going to be of use to others.
Wonderful. And one of the reasons that I targeted Lara is that I have known Lara for years, and she has such a stellar reputation in the HR community and being able to, spot talent, mold talent, and also to identify the needs of diverse candidates and how they're able to come into the workplace. But I want to talk a little bit first, as we always do, about Lara's journey, because I think being able to found and sustain a business with the excellent service that she has been able to do over the course of this many years is something to be celebrated. But I want to start at the beginning. Lara, what was the first thing you thought you were going to do when you were like in school? What was it that you thought you were going to do as a career?
Well, it's so interesting, and I think actually very useful for young people because my dream was to be an anthropologist. And so I was at Naparima Girls. I'm a very proud Naparima girl and did my O levels here in Trinidad. And then I went to England to do my A levels. And I was quite interested in anthropology. I had visions of myself, discovering new tribes in the wilderness and, kind of teaching them, I don't know, how to speak English and all sorts of wonderful things. And my father said, if you want me to pay for you to go to college, you have to study something that you can actually get a job with. So anthropology was out the window, and I ended up doing business management with tourism.
Oh, wow.
So, and I actually quite liked tourism, and I worked in the tourism sector in hotels, particularly, but also with travel agencies for a couple of years. In fact, my middle year at university was 1990. And long story short, I ended up working at Mount Irving Resort in Tobago as my summer internship. And that was the summer of the coup.
Wow.
So my final year thesis at university was on the recovery of tourism after an attempted coup, which they had never seen in the history of the college. So thanks, Abu Bakr for that. That was really, he helped me get a distinction in my thesis. And so I was in all about tourism, and I actually quite like the tourism space. I think the hospitality sector is really brilliant. But the timing was really not great for me. I was still in the UK, just couldn't get a job in tourism. There were no jobs. This is 1991, 92. And I actually went to a recruitment agency. We moved to London. I went to a recruitment agency to ask them to help me find a job in hospitality. And the consultant said, well, we don't have anything, but we are looking for a trainee recruiter. And of course, I had bills to pay, and I was renting a flat with my friends and so on. So I said, well, yeah, I'll do this while I'm looking for something in tourism. 30 years later, I'm running my own recruitment agency, and I've never looked back. And I absolutely loved recruitment. For those of you that don't know, there's different kind of types of recruitment, right? There's permanent jobs, there's contract work, of course. And I was actually working then on what we call the temp desk. So back in London, this is in the West End of London in the early 90s, you would get a phone call. This is all manual, right? We were using WordPerfect. Do you remember that horror?
I loved Word Perfect.
Oh
Like,
no, that was oh my
I
God.
still think that Microsoft Word has not gotten to the level of Word Perfect. And
Yeah.
I'm willing to challenge anyone who says that.
Well, I know you're a techie, but I struggled with that. But we had a huge notebook, I remember, with all the names of the temps down one. Every Monday we'd have to rewrite the list. And then the girls would come into the office, and it was all girls, secretarial recruitment. And they would come in on a Monday morning, and they would sit in, we had a lounge with coffee and newspapers, and the phones would start ringing, and you'd get Credit Suisse calling, or this bank, or this insurance company. Hey, my secretary's calling sick. I need a girl now. And the girls would get on the tube and run to whichever. And it was very competitive because they would call half a dozen agencies at the same time, very fast paced. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So I worked in recruitment in London for a couple of different agencies till about 1996, about 5 years and about 4 years. And then I came back to Trinidad. My father had lived here the whole time. I came back to Trinidad for a holiday. I think it may have been Carnival, just chatting with my dad about, living in London I loved it, but very expensive. And I felt like I was kind of a bit stagnating. And so we talked to a few of his business contacts, and they said, well, why don't you come to Trinidad to start an agency? And at the time, there were really only a handful of recruiters on the island. And so I said, okay, well, yeah, I'll try it for 5 years. And so I quit my job, I left my apartment, I left my fiance, and I came to Trinidad, and that's where I am now, and I've never left. And 5 years have come and gone, and we're now year 28.
Wow, you were fianced and
Yes, yeah. That's a whole nother story over cocktails.
wonderful. But how out of necessity, you go into this agency trying to find a job and find your destiny, that you are meant to be a recruiter to help others find jobs. And I loved that. I actually worked as a temp during my career as well. And, it was never that where, whoever reached first wins, because it sounds absolutely chaotic. But how brilliant of you to just sort of get into this fast-paced environment. And then did you end up doing a lot of recruitment for tourism, considering that you were coming back to the region, or?
Yeah, no, actually, no. I mean, because you would know in London, you've got the West End and you've got the city, and there's two very different types of recruiting. So I started in the West End. So it's a lot of the fashion houses, the theatres, a lot of the more creative community. And then the city, of course, is the banks, the insurers, etc. And I worked in both sides of recruiting. The city recruiting was all pretty much all secretarial then. And now agencies specialize, right? So that happened to work in secretarial recruiting, but it could have been IT, it could have been finance, legal. There's lots of recruiters that do medical recruiting. There's a lot of very specialized recruiters. And of course, executive search is a whole nother level of recruiting as well. But I really loved the fast pace of the temp desk. And I realized I actually worked for a brief time as an HR manager within one of our clients in the West End, which was a market research firm. They were looking for an HR officer. And I thought, maybe I'll try it from that side, from the client side.
Yeah.
And I went in to work with them and loved the people, hated the job. I
Wow.
realized I had to be outward focused. I needed to be dealing with people. I need to be moving around, meeting lots of different people. And so it was just too, because of course you're working for the company and it's just the few people that are there and processing, their leave and all of that. Nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't for me. And I realized that I really loved working with people. I was very sales oriented, very driven back then. I'm a bit exhausted now, but at the time I was very driven. And of course, when I was building Regency, same thing, right? I always tell people that I built Regency at Pelican because I
Yeah.
was networking like a beast at Pelican, networking.
Nice. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, literally out and about. And I think a lot of young people, especially people building businesses or young entrepreneurs, don't really appreciate the amount of blood, sweat, and tears that are required in the early days.
Yeah.
Cannot just put a post on social. Well, maybe you can now, I don't know, but you can't just plonk something on social media and hope the world calls you. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we're seeing certainly the same thing, right? It requires a level of sacrifice
Yeah,
and self-sacrifice and pride eating that you
yeah,
don't see in the foreground. You just see the success and you don't realize what went into that success. And I think a lot of young people are seeing sort of, the fruits of labor without necessarily acknowledging the labor that went into
yeah,
delivering.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I remember, and again, this is all, fax machine. I thought fax machine was an absolute miracle. In the early days, I would work obviously Monday to Friday. I would come into the office on Sunday. I would prepare candidate lists. I would fax them on a Sunday so that on Monday morning, when the clients went to work, there was a list of our top 10 candidates. I would drive around Port of Spain, putting our brochure through mailboxes, on a weekend. It was relentless. And I always remember reading very early on, and I mean, I don't come from an entrepreneurial family necessarily. My dad was an entrepreneur, but everybody else was, milkmen and farmers and in the military and fairly regular. But I remember reading very early on that if you can get your business past 5 years,
Mm.
you will probably succeed in the long term. That there was sort of this magic 5 year thing in my mind that I will, bust a gut for 5 years. And I was also quite lucky because this would be so 96 into 2000, 2001. And of course, the Trinidad economy was doing well. So there was space for new entrants to the recruitment market. And a lot of our clients were very willing to take a chance because it's quite low risk,
Yeah.
to try a new competitor, to try a new agency. And yeah, so I got my first call from Citibank. Joyce sees that I still have a copy of that first check.
Oh,
And she called me, she said, okay, I'm going to take a chance on you. And they're still a client 28 years later.
oh,
Yeah,
phenomenal. Oh,
yeah,
what?
it
Oh,
is.
that's heartwarming.
Yeah, she was amazing. And once you get one client of that caliber, you
Yeah.
then leverage it, right? To say you go to the other banks and say, "Hey, look, Citibank trusts me," or
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so yeah, it's been quite the journey.
Oh, that's brilliant. But I like that idea of like the 5 years, right? If you can stick it out for 5 years, then you
Mhm.
have the staying power. You've gone through enough storms that you can survive thereafter. And I think it isn't something that I've heard before, and I think it's something that we should share with young entrepreneurs. But I want to get back to something that you said about, having worked as an HR manager and realizing that that wasn't for you, and the sort of self-knowledge that represented, right? Because I've had the same experience where you're in a job, you love the people, but you hate the work and you realize this is not for
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
And being able to just understand that it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. It's just not a good fit.
yeah,
And being willing to develop an exit strategy at that point, rather than staying and eroding your self-worth in that
yeah.
process.
But I hear you, and I think that's correct, but I do think it's also very contextual
Okay.
because I was able to leave that job at a time where there were loads of recruitment jobs available. So I
Yeah.
was able to go very easily back into to become a recruiter again. And then, I had the support of my family
Mm.
to start my own business. I knew I was never going to be homeless. I was never going to be hungry. If this business failed and I
Mm.
had to go back to London and get a job or stay in Trinidad and get a job, I knew that that was an option for me. Even if it wasn't my dream, I had that cushion or that buffer. And
Yeah.
for a lot of people, that's not the case, right? So
Yeah.
you may be in a job that you despise, but do you have options? And I think for a lot of people, they don't. They're waiting to get their pension or they need the salary to pay their mortgage, and they don't necessarily have many other options. Which is why I think so many people, especially women, have their passion, their joy on the weekends.
Yeah.
You do your Monday to Friday job and you're paying your bills and putting your kids through school. But at the weekends, you come alive when you design carnival costumes or you make cakes or you host events or whatever that brings you real joy. And of course, the goal in life is to turn that into your career, right? But I don't think it's that easy for everybody to just say, I don't like it, I'm leaving, because the context is very different. I didn't have children, I didn't have a mortgage. So and the market was very, very buoyant then. There were lots of jobs. So I knew I could leave today and probably pick up another job tomorrow. That's not the case for everyone, unfortunately.
Yeah. I feel like we're getting closer together, but we're not going to meet in the middle. Because I do think that when you realize that the job is not a good fit for you, and yes, not everybody's going to land their dream job out the gate. But I do think once you realize that this does not light your soul
Yeah.
on fire, and yes, I understand the options but I think some people get stuck because they
Yes.
believe themselves to not have enough options. And
Yeah.
while the options may be limited based on the market, based on your skills, based on whatever else, I think that if you can, where you are, develop an exit strategy, then you at least have the ability to find something that you are better at, that is better suited to your skills.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think so. I always tell people, because of course we have in recruitment what we call active and passive candidates. So
Mhm.
active candidates, of course, people who may be unemployed or their job contract's coming to an end. But there are also tons of passive candidates, people who are in a job, but
Yeah.
maybe just keeping one eye out for that next great thing. And so I always tell people, have your resume ready at
Yeah.
any time, ready to go, just in case that amazing opportunity walks in the door. But I think it begins with understanding what truly makes you happy.
Yeah.
Because you can't, you shouldn't leave job A for job B if really job C is what you want. You
Right.
know, I think it's important to sort of do that self-analysis, find out there may be aspects of your current job that you really love and that you do really well, and that's what you want to build into a more robust career. So that's kind of self-understanding. It begins with that, I think. But yes, you should always be ready to jump if the opportunity presents itself, but knowing
Yeah.
I'm going to be amazing at that. That's really what I want to do. I was chatting with a candidate yesterday, a passive candidate who, her contract comes to an end at the end of this year, and she's already started to put feelers out
Mm.
because she's probably going to want to leave. She's been there a little while looking for something else. She's she's very open to what the market has to offer, but she's also very keenly aware of what her strengths are
Yeah.
and what she would like. So, you do a job and you think, you know what? I'd love to do those things again. I definitely don't want to do, like, for me, if you said to me this job is all word perfect, I'd say, right, okay. I have a friend who'd love it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Call me, call me.
So you need to do that self-analysis, I think, and maybe ask other people who've worked with you, what were my strengths, weaknesses, and of course where there are opportunities to learn and
Yeah.
and to build. And I think especially for people who have a very keen sense of their career goals, you have to stay connected to the industry, to other partners, people that you can collaborate with, because there's so many opportunities, as you have done, right? You've got your career that you've built, but you're doing other things over here, collaborating on this and partnering on that. And that's what I think makes life so exciting, is all the amazing people that you can bring into your sphere and work with. So
Yeah.
there's lots of opportunities to do lots of different things.
And I mean, and one of the things, and we were talking about this the last time we were together, about the degrees of separation, right? And so the more sort of things that you are involved in, especially the things that really, like, you're a Rotarian, you're doing work on the Model UN with the Rotary and young people. And, so you're working in all of these various areas, and that keeps you connected to the pulse of what's going on. I can't tell you how many opportunities have opened up for me, not because I have said, oh, that's what I want and let me go after it, but because I was in the right place at the right time while a conversation was taking place. And I was willing to say, hey, yeah, I'm interested in that. I'd like to participate. Or I said yes to something that felt authentic to me, and that opened another door. So I
Yeah,
think
I like to think of it as like being on a train, and
Mhm.
you're going in a particular direction with a particular destination in mind, but while you're on that train you're moving through the carriages. And
Yeah.
so I might go into first class and see Racquel, and I was having a glass of champagne and say hey, and you're sat next to Gina, and Gina says, oh hey, I've heard of you, would you be interested, and so you meet people on this journey through your connections.
Yeah.
And now one of the things though for me is I spent pretty much 26 years saying yes. I was on everything, as you heard, I was on every board. At one point, I was on 8 boards,
Wow.
most of them NGOs, but things I was passionate about. And I've been always a big believer in giving back to Trinidad because Trinidad has been amazing to me. So, as you heard, the NTA, the OPR, I was on the first OPR board, which was such a revelation. I'm so grateful for that experience. Um, but then I started my PhD in 2023. And so I came off everything to focus on that. And so the goal now is to put me first for a little bit to try and get this done. But still, still doing a few things here and there, particularly for my alma mater at NAPS. But I think you also have to know when it's right to say no.
Yes. And I think that's so important for women, right? Who tend to
Yeah,
just run ourselves into the ground
yeah,
and not sort of realize that no, you don't have to, you don't have to say yes to everything. And I'll tell
exactly.
you, yesterday I was having a conversation with a friend who was telling me about another friend who was having a problem. And she was saying, oh, and she was saying she was having a problem with this and she was having a problem with that. And so, and so I'm going to make some calls. And I was like, did she ask you to make some calls? Did she ask you to jump in and help? And she's like, no, well, she assumes that I will because I'm connected in that industry. It's like, don't take on other people's problems. Don't
Yeah,
take on other people's problems, one, unless you have chosen to take on the problem. And understand that when you take on the problem, that is a choice. But
yeah.
also, certainly, if somebody's intimating that they need help, wait for them to ask and then understand that you can still say no.
Yeah, yeah. I have a friend from school actually who migrated, she and her husband migrated to the US, and he happened to become very wealthy. He has a very fantastic job. And so out of when this started to become apparent that they were living very well in the United States, I remember her calling me and saying, all of a sudden, all these cousins and relatives are coming out of the woodwork asking if we can send things from the US and can we send money, and my kid needs shoes and this, could you send this? Could you send this? And she's somebody who's always been very family oriented and very kind and giving. So she was saying yes to everybody. And
Yeah.
she called me one day out of the blue. I hadn't spoken to her probably for 10 years, and just crying hysterically because she couldn't say no to anybody. And it was just wearing her ragged. I mean, a very large family, I mean, sort of, I don't know, 15 siblings, something, one of these things. So loads of people calling her. And I said to her, I said that the first thing you have to do is say no.
Yeah.
But the key is you don't have to explain why.
Yeah.
Because I think, and as you said, I think women particularly struggle with this. And again, I always remember reading about a woman whose sister, she didn't have kids, her sister had kids. So the sister called and said, hey, can you babysit, Mary and Tommy? And she said, no. And the sister said, why? What are you doing? She said, I'm not doing anything. Well, why won't you babysit? I don't want to. I actually would just, I don't have to explain to you why
Right.
I'm saying no. And that I think is very empowering. It is perfectly fine to say no, not because I have another thing or I've already
Right.
made another promise, but no, I'm just not going to do it. Sorry. I might be sitting, on the couch watching Netflix all night by myself with my cat, and that's okay. I don't have to justify my no's. So I think moving from that stage of, we apologize all the time and we want to explain ourselves, just say no. Yeah, I'm good with that now. Took me a while, took me 25 years to get the courage to just say no and not feel that I had to explain or justify it. But it's very empowering.
I can imagine, but I also and as someone who sometimes asks people to babysit that,
Yeah.
no, that's not true. Well, we're fortunate in that we have a nanny and she's extraordinary, and so we're quite lucky. But I will say that I've read, on like my third read of this amazing book called The Happiness Hypothesis. And I've noticed that not just that book, but some other books that I've read talk about this, human evolution being built on a concept of reciprocity. And so
Mhm.
it's so important that as much as you can say no, and it is perfectly acceptable to say no, make sure that you are on both sides of the fence. So on the one hand, you are standing in your no when you need to say no, but also that you are looking at who are the people who have helped me and am I willing to help others? And
Oh,
making sure that
sure.
there's balance in that, you're not going too far off one end
Yeah.
or too far off the other end.
Yeah, no, I mean, and there are people in my life who I will never say no to, right?
Yeah.
So you do know, as you say, right? I mean, if my sister asked me to do anything at all for those boys, she has four sons.
Mhm.
I will drop everything I own and go and help her in any way I can, and that is a given, and she knows that. There are other people who I might sort of try and schedule it in, and I'll say, I might think about it, but it's not really so much about for me I pick and choose, I think is really what I'm saying. I'm not saying no to everything. I have a number of assignment, projects that I'm working on with different organizations over the next few months, but I'm sort of minimizing the
Yeah.
amount of effort that's required from me because I'm studying. So whereas before I might have been, a good example is Rotary, as you mentioned. I'm a passionate Rotarian and have been for 20 plus years. We have a big conference coming up in April. I'm one of the trainers, so I have a number of workshops I have to deliver. But they wanted me on a particular committee. They wanted me to chair a particular committee, and I said no because I just knew it would be, 100 meetings and then all of these other things I'd have to pull together. I'm very willing for this particular year because of what I've committed to do these few things. So I'm not saying no, but I'm saying sort of partially yes. So I think it's really, as you say, it's that balance. It's that people know they can ask me and they will call me and I will help if I can, but I'm not necessarily going to be chairman of the committee,
Yeah.
right? For this year, for now. I have certain goals about boards that I want to be on, chairmanships that I want when I have finished my studies.
I think that's a great way to approach it. And for me, it is always about am I saying yes with no strings attached?
Yeah,
And that for me has to be the case. Like I
yeah,
have to know that I don't expect anything from you if I'm saying yes to this thing. But the
sure.
second thing is I need to be able to say yes without resentment. So how do I say yes to you and know that no matter how it goes, if it's like I've done a few marathons, and in the beginning it's always like, oh my gosh, why don't I do this more often? This is so amazing. I feel so healthy.
Yeah,
And then week 5, I'm just like, this thing is taking over my life. Why would I ever do this? Who signed me up for this? And so it's the remorse, right, that sets in when you realize the amount of time that it has committed you to. And
yeah.
just
I
making
find,
sure that you are
yeah,
upfront, you understand, and that you don't overcommit yourself where you don't intend to.
yeah. I do find sometimes that, you agree to do something and the person who's asked you is not clear on the scope.
Yeah.
And you love them or you've been friends for years or whatever it is. So they're a client. So you say, yeah, of course. And then, I mean, I've even with clients, even business contracts that we've signed, as you would well know, the scope is
Yeah.
is these five things. And by the time halfway in, there's 22 things that you're doing that weren't covered. And the client is saying, oh, well, we don't want to pay extra. So I think in life that generally happens, right? You think it's one thing and it's really a lot more. But you're right. The secret is to not resent the person or the organization or the committee because this thing has got out of hand. But I do think also being able to say, okay, well, I agreed to do these five things and
Yeah.
I've done those five. And so happily now handing it back to you guys to carry on. Or, okay, I'll do five more or whatever it is. But I think it's really about having intent. So
Yes.
not just sort of getting floating along with the stream or the river and ending up somewhere you didn't want to go, but intentionally
Yeah.
choosing a path or choosing a particular course of action that says, right, I'm okay to do these five more things. I've chosen to do them. And I think that's true of people's jobs as well. We see so many people who they'll come and say, okay, I want to retire from the bank. I've worked there for 30 years. That wasn't my dream. It just happened.
Mm.
And I kind of think, how did 30 years just happen to you? But it does, I think, for a lot of people,
Yeah.
you're dealing with you having kids, you're buying a home, you've got all those things, and your job or your career just sort of plods along. And before you realize it, it's 25, 30 years have gone by.
Yeah.
And did you really control that direction? Did you control some people, yes, but a lot of people, no, I just kind of moved when they told me go and work in this branch, I went and, I did this and that. And now, and I don't think people necessarily look back with regret, but perhaps not as much excitement as they, would have liked, or perhaps in their early days thought, oh, I could have an amazing career, and then didn't quite pan out that way. And I think that's true for so many people.
I think that gets back to your point about intentionality, right?
Yeah,
What is it that you want? And we're not all always going to get what we want, but you
sure.
certainly don't want to look back and say, I just kind of bobbed around and I didn't get to do any of the things that I wanted to do. And
Mm.
so having that intentionality about what is it that I want and being able to describe that to yourself.
Yeah,
And doing so, it can help you to craft a career or work within the boundaries that you're exposed to so that you get closer to the dream
yeah.
job situation life that you have in mind. But the first thing is to define what that looks like.
Yeah, yeah. I know a lot of people use vision boards. A lot of people will do, sort of personal goal setting. And I always remember one of my friends, again, I refer often to my NAPS girls, who I've known since I was 11. But one of my friends, I remember her telling us that she wanted to be a mum by the time she was 25. She was going to have her own business by 30, her own home. She did all of those things.
Wow.
She obviously had, there was a man in there at some point to create the child, but he was not a permanent fixture at that time. But she was just very clear. And for her, a lot of it was she came from a very, very poor background, and very few of the women in her family were educated. And she is very bright naturally, but she was also very driven. And now her son has just finished university in Miami. He's got a great job in the US. She's got her own business. And it just, to me, and there wasn't a sort of a structured plan. It was just, I'm going to have these things
Yeah.
and I'm going to do what I need to do to make them happen. But I also think, again, for a lot of people, the job that you're in, if it's a job as opposed to a career,
Yeah.
it may be fine and it may be okay, but what it's really doing is helping you build your dream in another parallel stream,
Yeah.
which might be building your catering business, or building your podcasting library, or I think, or saving money to be able to travel the world for a year and live in a van, or which seems to be the latest thing. I can't imagine living in a van for a year, quite
Oh
frankly,
my
but
God.
horrendous. But it's a thing, right?
That
So,
and death by drowning are the two things that probably the
yeah, I mean, my God. But
least
for
likely.
sometimes, the job that you're in now, there's a purpose as well. So
Yeah.
I'm going to do this for 4 years. I'm going to save my money, live at home, whatever, and then, launch my business or travel the world or go abroad and study or whatever. So I do think the key thing though is to try as best as you can to have some idea of what you want,
Yeah.
and work towards that, whether it's a 2 year or 5 year. And also life is so dynamic
Yeah.
that, what you thought was going to happen next year probably isn't going to happen. And so you've got to also be very resilient and very agile.
Yes, yes. So speaking about being very resilient and very agile and talking about you know, over the course of your recruitment career, what have you found most helpful in candidates that have been successful, in candidates that get what they want, in candidates that move up the ladder? What as an HR practitioner, what are some of pieces of advice that you would give for young people navigating their careers?
Um, well, I think, there's two aspects to every individual that we look at when we're looking at filling jobs or helping people with their careers. You've got your hard skills and your soft skills, right? So your hard skills would be your technical knowledge, your academic qualifications, etc. And those generally pretty routine. If we're filling a position, we would look for a certain base level of academic or experience or technical skills, computer skills, whatever you. But where people really are become or create their competitive advantages with their soft skills.
Mhm.
So things like your people orientation, your customer service, your communication skills, your ability to resolve conflict, your ability to be resilient and agile. And if you are able to demonstrate, so, looking at people who show initiative, people who are willing to go the extra mile for their employer, on the job, those are the things. And for me, one of the things I always look for as somebody who's always done this is whether you volunteered anywhere. If you
Yeah.
have no voluntary experience on your resume of any sort, whether it's through your church, through your brownies or Girl Guides or Rotary or Lions, or whatever it is, then to me that you're not a whole person. And I say that with huge judgment because I do think that, most people have the opportunity to give back in some way, even if it's very small.
Sure.
But it's an aspect of human character. I think that's really important. So what we look for are those soft skills. And in fact, I've been reading a lot now. Companies in the US, for example, not even taking resumes anymore. They just send you, they don't need your resume, they don't need your CV. They just want to have a look at your soft skills. What's your leadership experience? Give me an example of a time you've demonstrated initiative. How are you able to resolve conflict? For us in Trinidad, people orientation, customer orientation, critical. So if you can demonstrate those things through the projects you've worked on, the achievements you've had, of course, just your whole persona at the interview, even online, if you're doing remote virtual interviews, we see people who come in for interviews. I mean, we've interviewed thousands of people over the years, and you almost know as somebody walks in the door, their body language, their posture, their smile, their eye contact, if they're going to be a great candidate or not. I don't care if you're an accountant, a lawyer, a plumber, a mechanic. If I like your soul and your character, I can probably make it work in my organization. I could probably, and again, one quick example, and I was sharing this with you over the weekend. I have a gentleman who works for me who joined my company in the very early days with a couple of O levels. And I always describe him as sunshine in shoes because he came in and didn't really have any qualifications, but was just the happiest person I've ever met. And he's still with us, and he's now a manager and has a degree and owns his own home, and he's still sunshine in shoes. So that character, that personality, that shines, I think, that is so important. It's hard to get over on a resume, but
Mhm.
that's why, you can build out things like your LinkedIn profile. You can showcase so much of your personality, things like this, videos and podcasts. We have clients who ask for video resumes.
Yeah.
So there's opportunities now with technology to showcase your character and personality. And I think that can enable really good candidates who may not be so great on the academic side, but are willing to learn, open to opportunities, hardworking. I think, those sorts of things really will take you far, being open to what's on offer and being willing to learn. If an opportunity comes up at the workplace, you're the first person to say, yeah, I'll do it. I can stay late. I'll volunteer. That's the kind of attitude. And that is a rare thing, all of those things in one in combination.
But doesn't that then skew to people who are more extroverted? So, for example, introverted people, and yes, I feel like LinkedIn is a great place for introverted people to kind of show up and post things and that
Yeah.
would make, wouldn't necessarily take them out of their comfort zone. But there are roles that are inherently better suited for people who are more introverted and more sort of internal facing. And if they come to the interview and they're not, you're not seeing the personality because they're just a bit reserved, or even like on the volunteer activity. And yes, you said it was with judgment, but let's say you have a young single mother who, is at her wit's end with 2 to 3 children and just does not have the scope to volunteer. But if she also puts that she has 3 children, runs the risk of people saying, yeah, no, that's too much. She has too much going on. So how do we overcome these kinds of barriers where, the extroverts are always the ones out front, and that isn't necessarily the best fit for the job?
So I think that's correct. And obviously, you would take the type of job, the environment. If I'm recruiting for lab assistants, I don't necessarily want, the loudest, shoutiest people in the room in my laboratory. But you can demonstrate creativity, innovation, leadership, initiative without being loud.
Yeah.
So through the work that you've done, the projects that you've volunteered for, and even to your point about, a single mum, and I respect that, of course, that's a real challenge for so many women or so many parents. But maybe at school, she was captain of the football team or she was in their interact club at school. So it shows me that there was in some way that individual, enjoys volunteering or enjoys being involved in team activities. So there are signs that you can look for on a resume without the person having to be the loudest in the room. And I think if people know that they're very introverted and they're going out into the job market, they need to, I do think it's important to present yourself with confidence.
Mhm.
That's not the same as being loud,
Yeah.
but it is important to be able to clearly articulate what you are good at, what kind of environment you'd like to work in, what kind of opportunity you're looking for. So even if you have it in writing and you refer to it during the interview because you're quite a nervous person, or, this is maybe the first interview you've been on for a while, or that's absolutely fine. But I do think if you know that you're naturally not a very confident person and you're going into the interview space, the job market space, you do need to work on that,
Yeah.
and maybe, making notes, doing some reading. And one of the things, again, doing your research, and it's so much easier now with the internet.
Yeah.
So let's say I call you for an interview, Racquel, and you're a fairly shy person, and the position, let's say, is accounting assistant for an insurance company. You can go online and read about what are the qualifications or the qualities required to
Yeah.
be an effective accounting professional.
Yeah.
So I don't need you to be loud. I need you to be honest. I need you to have integrity. I need you to be very data oriented, pay attention to detail. And so you can express that in the conversation, but you've done your research to know that's what that job requires. And what we see is a lot of people come to interviews totally unprepared.
Yeah.
They haven't done their research, and they don't even know for themselves
Yeah.
what, and it's okay to be interested in 10 things. It's okay to, want not really be sure, but you should know what you're good at. You should
Yeah.
know what you really enjoy doing, even if you're a young person.
Yeah.
What did you love doing at school? You loved English, or you loved sports, or, where you loved leading a team, you loved raising money, you loved dealing with the community. These things are clues into where you might thrive. And I
Yeah.
think it's important to have that awareness of self, to be able to then articulate that to it. And a good interviewer will bring that out if they're doing their job properly.
Sure. But I love that. Make sure that you are, especially if you are sort of a non-traditional candidate, or if you are shy or introverted, to practice and prepare. And I think the
Yeah,
prepare component is for everyone, because I have been in interviews where people have just not been prepared, and they're like, what does the company do? And I'm like, what have you read about our work to understand what we do? And some of them haven't. And I'm like, how are
yeah,
you rolling into this interview, having done
yeah.
zero research? And it's just, you're
Yeah.
like,
And there's no excuse now. I mean, when you and I were
wow.
young, or when I was young, let me rephrase that. When I was young,
No, when we
you know,
were
you
young,
had,
it's
you
fair.
had to you had to physically go into the office to pick up a brochure, or go to the library or read the newspaper.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember in fact, again, when I was first started Regency, scoured the newspapers. Any company that was opening a new branch, we would send a letter to say, hey, congratulations, do you need staff for that new branch? I remember reading many years ago that the obituaries column is a great place to look for work, because if somebody's died, maybe their job's vacant, which I
Ooh.
don't subscribe to, but one idea. Um, but we had to do a lot of legwork to get data. Now you just push two keys and the website pops up, and their annual reports, and who their chairman is. And so they have no excuse, even on their phones on their way to the interview, to not get a bit of background research done. And one thing that we always tell people as well is you have to tailor your resume, your responses to
Yeah.
the individual job. So you end up really, you should have a dozen resumes for a dozen jobs. And
Yeah.
people don't really think through
Yeah.
how that works. So, we at Regency, we've done a number of different meet the experts, very similar to your sort of podcast. We've done these interviews that are on our website, trying to provide advice and information for job seekers to guide them. So I really feel like now you have to be very stubborn, to just not do any research, because there's so much information out there on how to prepare for an interview, how to write a resume. I mean, it's just everywhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's the first indication that you don't really want the job. If you're not willing to do the work to discover what the company's about, you don't want the job. And then why are you wasting your time and somebody else's by interviewing for it?
Yeah, yeah.
Now that we're getting to the end, I want to ask you the question that I normally close with, which is, what is the best advice that you've received?
Hmm. So I have a saying that I don't even know who originally said it, but the saying is, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu.
I love that saying. I love that saying. That's one
And
of my favorites.
yeah, for me, I don't even know who originally said it, but for me, it basically meant that other people are going to make decisions about my life, about the laws of our country, how our businesses are run, you name it. And so you have to be in the room. You have to be in the room where the sausage is made, right?
Yeah.
And so a big part of my journey has been, and again, I'm a very outgoing person, so I know that that's helped. I also know, and we've talked about this, that I am very privileged. I am privileged by my education, my socioeconomic, my race, all of those things do help me get into spaces that other women perhaps wouldn't, or other people wouldn't have access to. So I'm very aware of that and have tried to use it for good and to help others. But the point really is that you should try as best as you can to be involved in places and spaces where decisions are being made about you, about your life, your family, your country. Being an armchair critic or an armchair politician is not going to help Trinidad and Tobago. We complain all the time about what's wrong with the country. But when we say, okay, will you come with me and sign this petition or march on this, or people just don't want to get involved. And so for me, I think it's really about being at the table, not just being at the table, being chairman of the table. And if the table, bring your own chair if you have to, but pushing yourself into spaces and places where decisions about you are being made as best you can, getting involved, getting informed, asking questions, write to your MP. People who know me, I write letters to members of parliament and ministers all the time about
Right.
everything. I have a folder full of letters from various ministers of national security because I will not sit quietly by and say, oh, well, we like it. So, that's how Trinidad
Yeah.
is.
Ooh, another excellent book that I highly recommend.
Oh, yeah, Terence, absolutely
Yeah.
brilliant. But
Yeah.
we have that sort of lethargy, or apathy, or maybe we just feel like we can't change it. We've tried, it hasn't worked. But I don't believe in that. I think optimism is absolutely essential to build a prosperous nation and families and communities. So get involved, I think, is really what I would, in whatever way you can, even if it's just on your street, in your village. Get to know your neighbors, help your neighbors. If your neighbor's kid needs something, help them. If there's a pothole in your street, get the neighbor together and fill it. Why can't we do for ourselves
Yeah.
and help each other more? I think that would go a long way.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lara. This has been such an inspiring conversation. And I think one of the reasons, and I can't leave without saying this, one of the reasons that I admire you so much is that you've never shied away from the privilege that you have, and you always try to do more with it. And I think it that authenticity of showing up, acknowledging, listen, we all have different benefits and different privileges, but let's try to do the best that we can with what we have to benefit those who are less fortunate. And I think that that is so, so, so important. I hope
Thank
you've
you.
enjoyed this conversation with Lara and me, and thank you so much for sticking through the end. I have thoroughly enjoyed just talking to her about all of the ways in which you can better prepare yourself for the next step in your career, being prepared, doing the research, and being willing to stand up and be counted and sit at the table, even if it means that you need to bring your own chair.
Well, thank you, Raquel, for having me. It's so lovely to connect with you again and to see you twice in 1 week. I'm truly very grateful for
Yes.
that. But yeah, very happy to be here. And anybody who would like help or advice, please reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. I'm not on any of the others because I don't really know how they work. I'm trusting them less and less now for obvious reasons.
Right?
But yeah, I do think that it's been a lovely conversation, and I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So see you next time. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. We're on Apple and Spotify and anywhere that you find your podcast. We're also on YouTube. So I look forward to connecting with you and hearing from you and getting your recommendations. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. See you soon.